In September of 2014, pop culture critic Anita Sarkeesian spoke at the XOXO Festival in Portland, Oregon. The topic of her talk was online harassment. Not just the harassment that she had personally experienced, but the harassment that all women have experienced online. And in conclusion, Ms. Sarkeesian proposed an idea.
Every day, many women voicing their opinions online deal with a similar flood of slander and defamation designed to undermine their careers, their credibility, their resolve, and their confidence. So I leave you with one simple thought. One of the most radical things you can do is to actually believe women when they tell you about their experiences. Thank you.
The following year, MTV's Brawless host, as in the host of a show called Brawless, no telling whether or not that's a pun, Lacey Green, made a variation of this argument, not in regard to victims of online harassment, but in regard to victims of sexual assault. Once again, the focus of the argument was on female victims.
What do you do when someone tells you that they've been sexually assaulted or raped? Firstly, believe them and make sure that they know that you do. It's really hard to come forward about sexual violence, and many survivors are not believed.
Rape victims are nearly universally doubted, and paranoia about them lying dominates every conversation. Seriously though, y'all, why don't people trust rape survivors? I think there's a related trend here. People don't trust women. Because women's feelings can't be trusted, our experiences and our very sense of reality aren't to be trusted either. Are you sure that happened? Are you sure you're being rational? Women learn to question themselves and they feel like they're going crazy. The distrust and paranoia ultimately makes it harder for victims to get justice and maintains the power of rapists because they know they won't be held accountable.
The argument made by Green and Sarkeesian is, essentially, to listen and believe. Believe women when they claim to be the victim of a crime or otherwise disgusting behavior. Now, so far, you've probably noticed that no argument was actually made by either women. Sarkeesian merely proposed that we listen and believe, and Green speculated as to why we do not. But what is the argument in favor of actually doing this? Well, before we entertain an argument, we should address this motion in different contexts. Because in a personal context, it's not unreasonable to believe someone whom you know and love. Loved ones tend to be worthy of blind faith. In the context of the media, it's not unreasonable to listen. If it's of public interest, then the public ought to hear about it. And of course, the listen half makes perfect sense in the context of the justice system too, but it's the other half, the believe half, that seems a little disconcerting in terms of actually serving justice. Here's an example of why. Imagine you have two children, a son and a daughter. One day, they both run up to you. Your daughter points at your son and says, "He pulled my hair," or whatever. She accuses him of X. Your son loudly says to you, "No, I didn't. She's lying." One of two things is true. Either your son has lied or your daughter has lied. You, as the parent, can choose to believe your son or to believe your daughter. Unfortunately, for the sake of this argument, there's no tangible way to actually prove who's telling the truth, and that means that there are a total of 4 possible outcomes. Your son is guilty, but is not punished. Your son is guilty and is rightfully punished. Your son is innocent and is not punished. And your son is innocent, but is wrongfully punished anyway. The mathematics dictate that there is a 2 out of 4, which is the same as a 1 out of 2 chance, that you will make an unfair decision, which puts you, as the parent, in a tough spot. Not only is there a 50% chance that you'll make the wrong decision, you'll never know for sure whether or not you made the right decision. This, very, very simply put, is the reason why justice is a piece of cake in concept, but potentially impossible to carry out in practice.
If false reports are something that worries you, know that statistically, you're on the side of reason and justice and truth to believe someone who comes forward. And any survivor who finds the strength to come forward on YouTube or beyond, I believe you. And one day I hope that the world does too.
With all of this now in mind, let's consider the argument that Ms. Green would later provide in April of 2016 as to why a person who claims to have been raped or sexually assaulted should be believed.
Hey internet, question. Have you ever worried that someone was lying about rape? Couldn't you or me or anybody in the world just make up a rape for attention to get revenge out of jealousy? Yeah, you could totally do that. But would you do that? And how often does that actually happen? And how often does that actually happen?
These two questions are the foundation of Green's argument, and they make for a rather lousy foundation because the answers to both questions are irrelevant. First, the question, would you do that? Well, most people, hopefully, would not. Some people, sadly, would. This question doesn't get us anywhere. Secondly, how often does this actually happen? The reason why this information isn't relevant to the issue at hand is because guilt is not predicated on probability. It's predicated on evidence. So since the statistical probability of an accurate account is moot, and since that's the main premise of Miss Green's argument, no need to keep repeating this point over and over again. We'll just keep track of each time that this line of reasoning is employed.
The FBI states that between 2 and 8% of rape reports are false, which is actually a low number in the crime world. Other crimes, like say theft, they hover around 10% false reports. And even that 2 to 8% statistic is deceptive. It includes reports where someone accidentally identified the wrong person, reports that are thrown out because of inconsistent details, but it is a well-known fact amongst victimologists that trauma affects your memory.
The reason why Green considers this 2 to 8% figure deceptive is because a false report, in the eyes of the law, is a knowingly false statement. And so, by that standard, it may seem a little unfair to include in this category reports that were unknowingly false. But in the interest of not losing the plot here, the argument being made is that reports of sexual assault should be believed. If somebody reports wrong information or reports the wrong person, what difference does it make if it was on purpose or by accident? Either way, it obviously undermines this argument. So when Miss Green points out that some reports are accidentally false and argues that it's because trauma affects your memory, not only is that another moot point, it's a counter-argument. In fact, trauma affects your memory might just be the ultimate counter-argument against listen and believe. And Lacey Green brought it up herself, inadvertently undermining her own argument. If trauma really does affect one's memory, that is a good reason to not believe an accusation.
But it is a well-known fact amongst victimologists that trauma affects your memory, and that 2 to 8% includes survivors who recanted. Someone could take it back because they were lying, sure, but much more commonly, they take it back because they're being pressured to take it back, or because they've decided they'd rather just not deal with it. So what does this mean? It means that malicious, actually false reports and allegations are pretty rare, and yet, doubting someone, calling them a liar when they come forward is extremely common. Sometimes the perpetrator even goes so far as to say, "I didn't do it." They're lying. This affirms people who don't want to believe that the sexual assault happened.
One of the problems with Green's argument, aside from her supporting points being ultimately moot, is this false dichotomy that people either believe the accuser or believe the accused. Just because you don't believe somebody doesn't mean you therefore believe that they're lying. There is a third option, and that option is agnosticism. Agnosticism, doubt, skepticism, reservation, uncertainty. In other words, it is possible to believe neither person. It's possible to call neither the accused nor the accuser a liar. But this logic seems to be lost on Green's argument. When referring to people who don't want to believe the accuser, this little thought bubble on the side of the screen reads, "He's not the liar, she is." This is an oversimplification as well as an underrepresentation of the other side of this debate. Not everybody who disagrees with the argument that Green is making jumps to the conclusion that the accuser is lying. A lot of people arrive at no conclusion whatsoever, and it's not a good look to omit those people from this discussion. By now, you might be coming under the impression that Lacey Green is dancing around her own thesis. Not once yet has she actually stated in plain English that you should believe every accusation of sexual assault. And you might also think that she hasn't properly addressed the elephant in the room yet. What if somebody is falsely accused?
But wait, what if it really is actually truly false? False reports are illegal, and they're typically taken pretty seriously when they surface. It's really important to talk about them, because ultimately, in this fight, we're fighting for justice for everyone. So we need to pay attention in the rare moments that this happens to address them, to better understand them, and we do a whole lot of talking about false reports, which is why we also need to talk about the...
As a rule of thumb, when somebody begins a sentence with, "which is why we also need to," that's an opportune time to pull the emergency brake and stop the conversation, because this is typically followed by an attempt to manipulate the focus of the conversation. In this particular case, the first in a series of 4 manipulative attempts to distract from the fact that this question is never given a straight answer.
Which is why we also need to talk about the reality that sexual assault accounts are nearly always true. How we more readily believe someone who says they've been robbed than they've been raped. How men are far more likely to be sexually assaulted than to be falsely accused. How it's far more common that a survivor is convinced to back down by the public, friends, family, even the police when something horrible did happen.
What we have here appears to be a non sequitur. A non sequitur is a conclusion or a statement that does not logically follow from the previous statement. It looks like this: most cars don't crash, therefore none of them will crash. Which is no better than arguing that most rape charges are true, therefore assume them all to be true. Not only is there no logical connection between the premise and the conclusion, the logic promptly defeats itself. If most rape accusations are true, it logically follows that some of them are false. If we believe all of them, it logically follows that innocent people will be found guilty. And an innocent person found guilty is only the opposite of justice. So to make an argument like this in the name of justice, well, that's good enough to be a Monty Python sketch.
Well, if people can't fly, what am I doing up here?
You're on a wire.
I am not on a wire, I am flying.
You're on a wire.
I am flying.
Look, I can see you on a wire. Look, there it is.
Look, I told you, you bastard, I'm not on a wire.
Oh, there is.
There isn't.
Is.
Isn't.
Is.
Isn't.
Is.
Isn't.
Is.
Isn't.
If false reports are something that worries you, know that statistically, you're on the side of reason and justice and truth to believe someone who comes forward.
So, in conclusion, this argument is not on the side of reason because the logic is self-defeating and relies on moot points. It's not on the side of justice because guilt is not predicated on chance, and it's not on the side of truth because it negates the need for evidence and leaves you vulnerable to being bamboozled by a false accusation. It doesn't take a lot of mental might to turn an argument like this on its head. Why not believe all men who claim to be victims of a false accusation that was made by a woman? Pound for pound, it's the exact same argument. The only difference is who we're making it on behalf of.
And I mean, look, couldn't you or me or anybody in the world just make up a rape for attention, to get revenge out of jealousy? Yeah, you could totally do that. But would you do that?
Who are you talking to?
And how often does that actually happen?
What the hell are you talking about?
Men are far more likely to be sexually assaulted than to be falsely accused.
What does that have to do with anything?
Malicious, actually false reports and allegations are pretty rare.
What does that have to do with anything?
And yet, doubting someone, calling them a liar when they come forward is extremely common.
What the hell does this have to do with anything? Tell me what's happening!